Hello, I'm Amy Stevenson, and this is The Human CEO. In each episode, we'll be meeting with CEOs and senior leaders to understand their approach to leadership, the challenges they faced, and how they overcame them. We'll also be asking what they feel it takes to be a great leader.
You know, when I think about those that have inspired me the most through my career, that combination of inspiration but resilience, I think, is the killer combo for me when it comes to leadership.
Welcome to The Human CEO. I'm your host, Amy Stevenson, and today I'm joined by Tim Robinson. Tim is the founder and CEO of Doddle, a fast-growing e-commerce delivery platform powering scalable and profitable click and collect returns across 4 continents. Tim is an accomplished entrepreneur with over 3 decades of experience working across large public sector industries and private businesses. A resilient leader with a track record of navigating companies through significant transformation, Tim spent a decade in executive roles in logistics, transport and freight, both in the UK and internationally. Tim joins us today to share his insight as a leader and a human CEO. Thank you for joining us today, Tim. It's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Delighted to be with you. Appreciate the chance to chat.
I'm looking forward to it. And so can you tell us a little bit about Doddle as an organisation and what you're working towards, please? What's it stand for?
Yeah, of course. So Doddle's a business that's nearly 8 years old now. And, you know, really sort of founded on the back of a personal belief of mine that whilst e-commerce as a thing, I think is great for consumers, great for business, great for society. There is going to be a glass ceiling in terms of how much e-commerce can grow unless we as an industry, you know, and I'm a logistician by background, unless we start to make the whole kind of delivery methodology more sustainable and more scalable. You don't have to live in just a big, dense urban environment to see more and more white vans driving up and down your streets every day and sitting in traffic jams and, and reading about pollution and climate change. You know, not all, but, a decent proportion of that is driven by the growth of e-commerce and the impact of home delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what was the catalyst for that then? Was it just something that you noticed the trend was changing, or?
Yeah, it was. I would say it was the negative trend was around profitability, really. You know, I've been in and around sort of retail logistics and delivery for a long time in various forms, actually. Right from being involved in global shipping through to rail freight, through to, kind of street by street parcel delivery. And, what I was finding was that as we as an industry were experiencing more and more volume and more demand, we were seeing our profits dilute. So I'll be honest, the original red flag was around profitability. That was the thing that was concerning. The more and more volume we put through our infrastructure, through our systems, through our workforce, the less and less money we're making. And that's basically down to the impact of the final mile. About 40% of the end-to-end delivery cost of a pair of jeans is consumed in that last mile, getting it to your front door. And that was having a disproportionate impact on profitability.
Fantastic. That makes perfect sense as well. And so as a leader of that kind of organisation, so we spoke prior to recording a little bit about the growth that you've experienced through the pandemic. As a leader of an organisation in that position, what kind of challenges are you up against at the moment? So,
I would say that ours is a relatively crowded space, e-commerce and e-commerce fulfillment. There are very smart, cool digital businesses, popping up day in, day out, more investor money going into this space than any other space globally. And therefore, attracting talent is very difficult because there are lots of choices open to kind of the best ultimately. And we're looking for technologists, obviously, in our workforce of about 100, about 60% of our employees are software engineers of one form or another. We're looking for product leaders, digital product leaders. We're looking for salespeople. We're looking for, kind of service delivery expertise. And these are all roles that are in very high demand, particularly here in the UK. And so, the move to remote working, on a more prolific basis than maybe that existed in 2019 has certainly helped. The addressable market feels a bit bigger maybe than it might have done a couple of years ago. But I think that continues to be a big challenge. Mm-hmm. But also I would say that in order for our business to be successful, we rely on our software and hardware solutions to be deployed by relatively large traditional businesses. And whilst we have a very good and fruitful relationship with Amazon, for example, as a client, we also work for national post offices globally, years of history and infrastructure. Yeah. And we work for large kind of parcel carriers and retailers in different parts of the world. And ultimately, adapting to this change is difficult the bigger you get. Yeah. Ironically, the bigger you are and the greater your history, actually there are more barriers in the way to evolution, and therefore, we're having our sales cycle is long, mm-hmm. And our market is geographically widespread for that very reason, because there aren't many buyers. But I call these things challenges, but in practice, this is the world we've entered. This is the challenge we've steeled ourselves for. And it's going okay right now.
Good. Absolutely. That's the way to look at it. And so in terms of your journey into leadership then, how did that happen? Was it an organic process, or were you always sort of headed for the chief exec seat?
No, I think it was definitely organic. So I'm one of those that, got into work relatively early. So, I left school without a real kind of solid plan, to be honest, about what I wanted to do. My dad actually came up with a really cunning plan, which was, how do you advise your son who, was bright enough, but keen, but didn't really have a plan. He came up with the idea that we would write to every company we could think of with British in the title. The assumption being is that they would be big. And therefore I could, land and find the right path for me in the future. So British Gas, British Telecom, British Airways, there was a few that weren't so big. It turned out as we wrote to them, but lots of these businesses were large corporates. Yeah. And it just so happens that British Rail, as they were back then in the late 80s, responded positively. And I jumped at the chance of joining a big organisation like that. Yeah. And frankly, joining that organisation in 1990, 4 years prior to rail privatisation, was pretty good timing, because what felt like within 10 minutes of me arriving, there was lots of change going on, lots of modernisation of business and business practices, and therefore probably more opportunities for keen 20-year-olds than would have been had I arrived in that organisation in a different era.
Yeah, and what a way to learn.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and it's a great way to learn. And so I went from working in a payroll office, kind of managing a roster for a bunch of train drivers, through to working in ticket offices, into HR, and ultimately, over the space of a few years, managed to work myself into kind of junior management and then more sort of leadership positions, and learned as I went, really. Again, joining an organisation of that size and scale, there's also opportunities to do more academic learning. So I was lucky and was supported through night school. So I was able to then top up my kind of academic education as I got a bit older, and probably a bit wiser to its benefits than maybe I was at 16, 17. And in doing so, kind of got to, learn from lots of great people at various levels of that organisation, but also those I was studying with and getting to know outside of the industry. So it kind of started very organically and probably became a bit more of a plan and a bit more of a considered thing, towards the back end of the 90s, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds as though it was almost like one of the traditional graduate schemes. You have the rotation through the departments, and that I think I'm a big believer in that, because it gives you the context across the organisation. You understand what people's roles are and why those roles exist and the value it brings to the business. So I think it's a great place to start.
It was very much like that. I mean, it felt like, I was on, a kind of a a bit of an organic apprenticeship. Ultimately, you know, every now and again you would get told that it's probably time for you to move on.
Yeah.
You know, and the great thing about a very hierarchical kind of grade structure was you get 18 months into being a CO3 and you want to be a CO4, and therefore every 18 months you're looking at vacancies and opportunities, and as you say, building your context as you go, meeting lots of leaders, good, bad and indifferent, along the way, and taking what you can from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Which leads me on to my next question. So how would you define a great leader? Are there characteristics that you think are common across all great leaders, or is it case by case?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, if I think about my own experience, you know, even right up to today, you know, meeting new sort of business leaders as you do leading a business like this. I mean, I would say there is a reasonable degree of commonality. So I think first and foremost, I feel like the most effective leaders are extremely strong when it comes to articulating the story. Yeah. You know, and painting the picture about where you're going as a business, but also where you're going as an individual. I think you've got to be authentic, you know, when you're trying to inspire your colleagues, your clients, your suppliers, you know, everybody in your ecosystem. You've got to have a really compelling story and a really exciting plan, and I think that is essential. So being a relatively strong orator, I think, is important in that sort of stuff. But I would also say that you have to be resilient with it, because you know, unless you're extremely lucky or absolutely brilliant, the chances are your journey isn't going to be a straight line. You know, you're going to inspire, you're going to create a vision, you're going to get a load of buy-in and support from everybody in that ecosystem. And then you might have to tweak that story, and you might have to apologize every now and again, and you might have to redefine it, and you might have to go again. So you've got to be pretty resilient in all of that. And I would say that, you know, when I think about those that have inspired me the most through my career, that combination of inspiration but resilience, I think, is the killer combo for me when it comes to leadership. There's lots of obviously more tactical things that I think are important and play out, but they're probably the two that stand out for me. Yeah,
fantastic. And so has there been an experience or a piece of advice that someone that you've come across in the past has given you to shape your leadership style or your approach to?
I mean, I would say that I was fortunate enough, you know, I made the point earlier on that my kind of, you know, real leadership journey felt like it started in the late 90s. And that was, I was given the opportunity to step out of that kind of big corporate railway and join a startup, which was, you know, looking to build a new business in this new privatized industry. And, you know, and the opportunity came from a guy I didn't know particularly well at the time. We'd met a few times, you know, in the industry. I was pretty young, and he secured significant backing from a bunch of, you know, financial investors to go and create this new business and you know, start to disrupt, you know, a relatively traditional sector. And he'd obviously seen something in me in those times we'd met that he wanted to get hold of. And you know, he very quickly inspired me with the story. You know, literally, this was he made the kind of the pitch to me the week I was getting married. It turns out the only time we could get together to chat was the night before I was getting married. So we met for a drink at a bar at Euston Station. Yeah. And, you know, I'd been very honest with him about, I've got literally an hour here because I've got stuff to do. And so within that hour, you know, kind of any kind of reservations I'd had about, you know, stepping out of the comfort of kind of corporate life and career, you know, being a career railwayman, you know, were completely overshadowed and overrun by the excitement of changing the world and doing something differently. And I actually worked in and around that individual probably for about 15, 20 years in a few different guises in that same business, ending with me still being a non-exec board director of that business up until 2019. And I would say, whilst that story has changed a bit, you know, this guy's a guy called John Smith, who founded a business called GB Railfreight, which is now a huge business, major player in the sector. You know, his ability to inspire not just myself, but convince train drivers that had been working for British Rail for 30 years and paying into the pension fund to step out of that environment and come and join a startup business. I mean, that was, you know, truly transformational from an industry perspective. Nobody thought it could be done. He's now got 900 train drivers in that business, most of which, you know, have stepped out from the comfort of you know, kind of almost national service, you know, into a world where there's probably more perceived risks, but has continued to inspire in that regard. So I think I learned a lot from him in that regard, that around, you know, make it exciting and inspiring at all times.
Fantastic. And so in terms of, I guess, one piece of advice, if you can put your finger on one piece of advice that you would deliver to someone that was in your previous shoes, so either looking to follow in your footsteps or just about to take a step up into a leadership role, is there one piece of advice that you would offer them? I
mean, I was given some advice a few years ago, and it was actually recounted to me in slightly different terms, slightly different circumstances, but from two different kind of leaders that I have a huge amount of respect for, from different eras of my working life. Initially, I was told, sort of back in the 90s, that the important thing about building careers is work out who you want to work for and find a way of working for them. So don't worry so much about the job. You know, if you're in industry or you're in a corporate, you know, find the people that inspire you. Find the people that, you know, that might just be cool, fun, you know, might be doing, you know, leading interesting projects, and find a way of working for them. You know, that and make that a thing. And interestingly, latterly, in very recent times, actually, in the last sort of 18 months, I met a guy who's chief exec of a very successful business out in the US that Doddle partners with. And, you know, he made a point to me, which I think is very similar, but that point being that, you know, building businesses, the trick to building businesses is work out who you want to build them with and make sure you build it with them. And he was talking about investors, funders, financiers. He's like, don't just take money from everybody or anybody. And, you know, he's like, you're an attractive business with, you know, a lot of good going on. You know, and you'll have lots of people offering you money and offering you, the streets that are paved in gold. He's like, his advice was, you know, work out who you want to work with, who you want to invest in your business, who you're prepared to to go through the good and the bad times with, and find a way of getting them in. So similar advice, but in two different contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And so you've spoken about John Smith, and you've spoken about a couple of other people from your past, but is there a leader, past or present, that you either particularly identify with or are inspired by? Is there anyone sort of?
I think there's a couple that, you know, it's always, you know, when you think about leaders you identify with, you've got to be careful not to sound like you're overblowing your own importance ultimately, because often they're pretty significant figures. But you know, I'm a football fan, as you know, as a hobby. And I have to point out right now, I'm not a Man United fan. Okay. But one of the characters that, you know, leaders that I've always had a huge amount of time for is Sir Alex Ferguson. And I think, and there's a few things that he's talked about in his books, and, you know, as over years, as he's sort of spoken publicly, which I think really resonate me. But also when I look at how he built that very successful dynasty that he had at that football club. And it's been very important for me. And I think one of the things that stands out for me is his acknowledgement, you know, recognition and commitment to reinventing that team. Yeah. You know, to you know, knowing that certain at times, you know, if your product is your footballers, which was, you know, his product was his footballers and his team, he knew over various phases of his 20 odd years at that club that he needed to reinvent it, and he couldn't just stick with what he'd had previously, because they would fall behind. And I think that's very important in business. And if I look at just the 8 years that Doddle has existed, you know, in an emerging market that's changing rapidly, we've had to reinvent ourselves 3 times really in that period of time. And in doing so, sometimes, you know, you have to steel yourself for letting really good people leave your business because they don't happen to fit the shape, and people you love and you've got a huge amount of time for, but you have to have the difficult conversation with them. You've got to, we've had to step away from really kind of what were important at the time, products and services. Mm-hmm. Some of them very public in my world, because I didn't feel I could fulfill our ambition of scale ultimately and growth. And so being able to to move on and accept that era has gone, I think is very important, but I also, now for the last 8 years, I've worked directly for a guy called Sir Lloyd Dorfman, and Lloyd's a major shareholder in Doddle. He's my chairman, the founder of Travelex, the travel exchange business, amongst other things. Yeah. I think this, one of the things that I identify with Lloyd is, for a guy who spent years in financial services, he's far more led by excitement, people, and opportunity than he is the numbers. He just kind of knows. He knows when something's right, when a change of direction is right. Okay. And the two occasions where I've had to sit down and have difficult conversations with him about, right, so this phase we've now got to here. This has been great. That's more difficult. I'm going to do this. Uh-huh. Every time he's got, I get it. He's like, I get it. I back it. He hasn't required me to present detailed business, kind of analytics or comparables or whatever, you might get in different environments. He's gone, I've got it. I've got it. We talk about unit economics and of the obvious things and what things might cost, but he backs intuition and that sense of purpose and direction. Yeah. And so I think those two things, probably stand out for me.
Yeah, fantastic. It's the people. It all comes down to the people, doesn't it? Eventually.
It does, yeah. It does.
And so what's next for Doddle over the next 12, 18 months? What's on the horizon for you guys?
So we kind of grow. That's the key thing. Yeah. We're in that sort of phase where, grow from a revenue and client perspective, but also grow from a team perspective in terms of being able to service those clients and that growth. Yeah. We worked out the other day that a significant proportion of our workforce now has joined us between January the 1st, 2020 and today. It's a big shift for us in that, so over 50%, and actually it's a very small percentage of our workforce now were with us in 2017 when we made our kind of final pivot. He says, having said how important it is to change and evolve, continuing to build, to inspire and entice the right people into our business remains very important. But ours is a business model which relies on kind of international growth. It's part of the challenge, but part of the excitement, because the nature of what we do means, we're paid relatively small clips per transaction, which means you need a large addressable market. Yeah. So we have a team in Tokyo. I've got a team in Australia, a team in the US, and of course here in the UK. Really, the next year is about building that. We got some really exciting stuff going on in Saudi Arabia, some good stuff going on in Italy. And, probably amongst all of that, 2022 for us is about the US, and we've just signed 2 deals, which are pretty transformational for us. So great. I'm at that phase now where I'm excited and terrified about pulling it all off, But,
what a place to be, though.
Yeah, what a place to be. So I'm off there next week, and which is great, the first time in 2 years. So we're really excited about all of that.
Fantastic. Well, Tim, I wish you the best of luck. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. And not only have I enjoyed speaking with you, you've reminded me I need to send a pair of jeans back. Thank you for that.
Excellent. Take it to your local Morrison's. We'll look after it for you.
I shall.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Really appreciate it.